So today we're going to dissect how the book Invisible Boy explores the emotional and psychological toll of assimilation in Canada's adoption system through the theme assimilation and its psychological traumas. So throughout the memoir, we see that to cope with these emotional and psychological burdens of assimilation, Harrison Mooney uses humor to conceal some of his traumatic experiences. However, the ramifications of these traumatic experiences illustrates the psychological toll of assimilation and the need to assimilate to avoid the misfortune of being othered. In the first chapter of the memoir, Harrison states, "So I stopped at the coffee shop on my way home. I was standing in line for a donut or 6 donut holes in a box when an elderly white woman turned around and saw me behind her and shouted out an expletive." Despite the explicit racism experienced by Harrison Mooney, his experience was not criticized as racism, and instead his foster mother suggested that he was disrespectful, and therefore he must have antagonized this old lady towards racism. Unfortunately, the response of the mother is normalized. Growing up in a white foster home, Harrison Mooney was taught that being Black meant that he was bad. Hence, his foster mom's automatic characterization of Harrison as disrespectful following his racist encounter with the old lady and the coffee shop. So also, this is seen when his foster mother characterizes Martin Luther King as unfaithful rather than highlighting his role and influence in the civil rights movement. It's these false teachings that stop Harrison Mooney from relishing his Black culture and understanding who he is as a Black man once reconciling with his biological mother. For example, Harrison writes, "I was told that she remains nearby, though I didn't dare seek her out," and he's referring to his mother, his biological mother. "It'll only hurt my adoptive mother. Plus, as I understood it, to waste any time on a vessel like her," which he's referring to his biological mother, "to look back rather than the path before was to doubt God, and that was simply no way to meet him." Despite these false teachings throughout the course of the book, we begin to see Harrison Mooney become more aware of how his foster home has controlled his assimilation process. Specifically, it was at the moment when he wanted to assist a young Indigenous boy with assimilating within the white church group. For example, during the sing-along, I saw that he was opting out of everything. I saw as well that no one seemed to care, and I began to feel responsible for helping him to assimilate. This moment was significant because it alluded to the assimilation process Harrison Mooney already experienced and his desire to guide the Indigenous child through a similar assimilation process. In addition to this, it alludes to the weaponization of religion to assimilate Indigenous people into whiteness. To provide us with some historical context of the assimilation of Indigenous people, the book states the natives went to St. Mary's Mission. They were always running off, and you would find them on the bridge and take them to church yourself. St. Mary's was a residential school across Fraser, and the reason that the town was known as Mission. The mission was cultural genocide. In 1934, an amendment to Canada's Indian Act made attendance of these spaces compulsory for First Nation children. Roughly 1,500 Indigenous kids were forced to leave their families. They were transferred to the care of nuns to be raised exclusively on Christian values and deprived of their identities. When the schools on the reserve, explained the country's first prime minister, the child lives with his parents who are savages. He's surrounded by savages. He's simply a savage who can read. So, in other words, Indigenous kids were taken from their homes into residential schools so that they assimilate into white religion, Catholicism, and the political leaders at the time felt that if they were to keep these schools on the reserves or on Indigenous communities, that it wouldn't really change much and they wouldn't get assimilated into white culture and white ways of doing things. So the idea of savage is also represented by and equated to Harrison's adopted mother's characterization of Black people. As such, assimilation was a necessary process for undoing quote-unquote savagery. Despite the phasing out of the residential school system in Canada, Canada's adoption system became a new medium for assimilated practices to be rooted in. For example, Harrison writes that by the 80s, the baby scoop era was set to be over. In fact, it was off the races. Indigenous kids became yesterday's news, and adoptions of Black babies skyrocketed. In the case of Harrison Mooney, what did assimilation look like? According to Harrison Mooney, belonging meant embracing his foster family for who they are and becoming that. As a result, Harrison felt that it was necessary to speak in tongues in church. What does it feel like to speak in tongues? It feels like belonging, stated Harrison. So similar to the Indigenous children who's within Canada's residential school system, Harrison Mooney needed to accept the religion, accept European beliefs, and abandon his own ancestral histories, teachings, and practices to not be identified as a savage. As such, Harrison states that Sunday later that day, I came to Gateway on a mission. I would show them that I was something else entirely, something better. However, the need to belong and become something other than himself shifted during that moment. For example, he states that I didn't like the way my performance made me feel, or that I had to go bananas every single bloody Sunday. At this moment, we witnessed the commencement of a shifting self-image that no longer wanted to be identified as being the exception and conforming to things that did not represent who he is. At this point, we begin to see that Harrison wants to be who he is physically, emotionally, and spiritually. As a result, towards the end of chapter 8, Harrison is no longer complicit with his foster family's overt mockery of Black people. Now that he's at a point of self-awareness and self-acceptance, he no longer has tolerance for those who are unaware of their racially charged behavior and unacceptance of him being Black. For example, Harrison writes, Can you tell we're brothers, I joked to anyone in earshot. Numb inside thereafter, I drove Ashley home in silence. Tom's costume was so funny, she said, it just to say something. Maybe she still loved him, but I didn't. He was dead to me, and so was his every allegiance. In addition to this, Harrison and at this moment, his complacency with his brother wearing blackface for Halloween, he did not want to, be complicit in it, laugh at it, and make it seem like it was okay. He was tired of constantly feeling like he was some sort of mockery, some sort of monster, some sort of, he just wasn't interested in that. He wanted to feel like he was human and that he was not someone else or an other or, something that they've always made him feel like because he was Black. So in this moment, even though his girlfriend at the time was saying, yeah, that was so funny, he couldn't get himself to do it. And at that moment, he's like, okay, I can't be with someone who is also complicit with racist behavior. So if I can no longer be with someone with complicit and racist behavior, I'm going to have to let her go, in which sense he did, which is an example of growth by Harrison Mooney. In addition to this, Harrison Mooney begins to embrace Black culture. For example, he immersed himself in Miss Simone's album, namely Silk and Soul in Baltimore. This process is represented by Harrison's statement, "Thus began the purge. With a dramatic sweep of my arm, I cleared the bookshelf, boxing up the faith-based content, every novel, every album. I restocked the unit with Norton Anthropologies, Course Paper, and Nina Simone's greatest hits. I raided the closet of everything silly, the big brimmed hats. I drove it all downtown to Value Village. I left it by the back door in the rain." He also gave himself a name. Reborn in Loud, I decided to take a new home, my given name, but not some childish name. My name is Harrison, I said in the mirror, 3 times to summon him, and once more for good measure. He also decided to make a conscious effort of reconciling with his biological mother. However, psychologically, this took a toll on him as the assimilative practices and the foster care are still taking place mentally inside his head. Specifically, he writes, I was thinking of my mother downstairs and how she might react if I seem too keen to meet the other woman. Maybe later. He also states that my mother was opposed to a reunion for my sake. So much could go wrong, she would often tell me. Be careful. A lot of people say that they regret meeting their birth parents. Once, she clipped an op-ed from the National Post that supported her point. She left it in the kitchen where I'd find it, and I felt that she was making herself clear. Don't do it unless you're ready for the consequences, ready to be on your own forever. Even though he moved out of his foster home and was somewhat abandoned by them, it pushed him to seek love from his originator and learn about his African ancestry from his mother. Fortunately, after meeting his biological mother and having the opportunity to learn what makes up who he is, he realizes that the time he spent throughout his life changing to conform and emulate whiteness to rid himself of the ugliness associated with being Black was a travesty. The reality was that he was beautiful. He was a beautiful Black man whose identity is not construed by classism and race ideology of the Europeans. This reality set in when he writes, blinded by the light, I lowered the passenger wind mirror, and the eyes looking down were my mother, true mother's eyes, and the face were my true mother's face, and for the first time I saw that I was beautiful. And at this moment, after looking at his mother, he realized that, wow, like this whole time I thought that being Black was a bad thing and that I was not handsome or wasn't enough. But looking at my mother, who is a Black woman, I realized at this moment that I was running from something that was not the truth, that I was beautiful because I was from her. So overall, honestly, I thought this book was great in exploring assimilation in Canada's adoption system. And it gives you insight into the experiences of what it is to be both Black and be both Black and white, and having to live in a white home that doesn't really understand the complexities of what it means to be Black and the sensitivities of what it means to be Black. So I'm really happy that he made this book, first of all, because it really gives you a glimpse into finding yourself and knowing who you are as a person, and having the courage to say, no, I'm not gonna accept being unaccepted. I'm not going to accept feeling like I'm not good enough. I'm not going to accept that I am this way even though I know I'm not that way. So if you're looking to read a book that focuses on self-love, self-acceptance, and especially as a Black person, this book is amazing. And I feel like he humanizes himself to the point where you begin to relate to him on a level that it's like, wow, you want to be his friend in a way, and the reason why you want to be his friend is because you're learning through his experience. And yeah, so anyways, this book was great in exploring assimilation in Canada's adoption system. And if you've read this book, please let me know how you feel about it and how it explores the topic in the comment section below. And if you don't have this book and you're interested in getting the book, you can find the link to the book in the description. I want to note that this book is an affiliated link, so I will make a commission. However, I really want to know what you guys feel about this topic, and how this book really speaks about this topic. I definitely say that this book is one of my favorites, and when getting it, I never thought that I would become so emotionally involved, but you really grow with him, and you really see his growth emotionally, psychologically. And in that moment when he looked at his mother at the end and was like, wow, like, I'm beautiful because she's beautiful. Like, I kid you not, I nearly cried. because sometimes I feel like society tells us that we're not good enough and that we're not pretty enough, but it's like it's those moments when you just stop and you realize that no, I am good enough and I am beautiful and I am pretty and I am smart, you know? So, yeah. So, anyways, thank you guys for getting up to this point in the episode. I also want to speak about some latest news. So recently, Obama has listed his Obama's 2025 reading list. And I was reviewing the list, and actually, I was surprised not really surprised, I shouldn't say. I'm not going to say surprised, but I was very delighted in seeing that there is an indigenous book. So I'm definitely going to add this to my reading list. It's called The Buffalo Hunter. The Buffalo Hunter. So, according to the Oprah Daily, so it's a historical novel about an indigenous vampire seeking retribution in the Wild West. While the premise may sound outlandish, much like Jordan Peele, Graham manages to use the blunt instrument of Hurl to perform a delicate autopsy of some of America's most foundational and ultimately fatal myths. I don't know. I feel like this book is going to be a movie in the making, so I'm going to read it. So that way, before it gets onto the big screen, I have some sort of like context, and I read the book, so I know what to expect. And if the movie doesn't really live up to the book, then I'm one of those people that are a harsh critic. But overall, after seeing that book on his list, that's something that I'm definitely going to take from it. Have you guys looked at his list? What are some books that you guys are thinking you're gonna add to your reading list or to your Amazon cart? Let me know. I'll probably add them to mine as well. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys think about this topic and how The Invisible Boy, really explores it in the comment section. I'm so excited because I really want to like discuss this more. And yeah, you guys, please get this book. Such an amazing read. You guys are gonna laugh, you're gonna cry, you're gonna grow. It's definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. So yeah, anyways, thank you guys so much for writing. Please subscribe, please share, please comment, let's discuss. And I love you guys all. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye.